Before we descend into the peculiar world of royal mattress testers, allow me to extend a humble invitation. If you find yourself intrigued by the absurdities of history, the quiet horrors of forgotten professions, or the simple pleasure of a story delivered with dry wit, consider subscribing to Nightfall Notion. Here, we specialize in tales that are neither thrilling enough to keep you awake nor dull enough to lull you to sleep. Stories that occupy that strange middle ground where history and humor tangle like bedsheets in the dead of night. Now, let us turn our attention to Chapter 1. The Royal Bedchamber, a realm of its own. The royal bedchamber was not a place for sleeping, at least not in the way common folk understood it. To the uninitiated, a bed was a simple thing. A frame, a mattress, perhaps a pillow if one were fortunate. But in the court of His Majesty, the bed was an instrument of state, a symbol of power, and, most crucially, a potential death trap. This was where the royal mattress tester entered the scene, a figure both pitied and envied, whose entire existence hinged on the dubious honor of lying down where others dared not. To call the bedchamber grand would be to undersell its oppressive extravagance. The walls were hung with tapestries so thick they muffled sound like a tomb, embroidered with scenes of historical battles where the king's ancestors always emerged victorious, no matter how decisively they had actually lost. The ceiling arched high above, painted with fat cherubs who peered down with expressions of vague disapproval, as if they too were judging the quality of the royal rest. Candles burned in gilded sconces, their light flickering over the bed itself, a monstrous thing, wide enough to fit 5 people comfortably, or one king and his ego. The mattress was the centerpiece, a plush, down-stuffed beast that seemed to swallow whoever dared approach it. It was dressed in linen so fine they might as well have been woven from clouds, assuming clouds were harvested by peasants who paid for the privilege with their sanity. But beneath the silk and lace, beneath the layers of feathers and wool, there lurked dangers unseen. A poorly stuffed mattress could hide a stray pin, a lump of uneven stuffing, or, in one memorable case, a disgruntled courtier's dead mouse placed with malice aforethought. This was where the royal mattress tester earned his keep. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the courtiers retreated to their own, vastly inferior beds, the tester would approach the royal mattress with the solemnity of a priest performing last rite. His job was simple: lie upon it. Not to sleep, never to sleep, that would be a dereliction of duty, but to ensure that the surface was free of lumps, pests, or assassin's needles. It was a job that required a delicate balance of paranoia and resignation, for while the tester was technically there to protect the king, everyone knew that if the mattress were poisoned, the tester would be dead long before His Majesty ever laid his royal head upon it. And so, with a sigh that echoed faintly in the cavernous room, the tester would lower himself onto the mattress, feeling for imperfections with the practiced ease of a man who had long since accepted his fate. The feathers would sigh beneath him, the silks would whisper, and somewhere in the shadows, a chambermaid would stifle a yawn, wondering if tonight would be the night the tester finally found something amiss. Outside, the kingdom carried on, blissfully unaware of the man who spent his nights pressed into royal bedding, waiting for a disaster that might never come. But in the bedchamber, time moved differently. Here, in this realm of velvet and peril, the mattress tester was both guardian and sacrifice, a man whose entire purpose was to be inconsequential until the moment he wasn't. The candles burned lower. The cherubs kept their counsel, and the tester, as always, lay very, very still. Chapter 2. The Birth of an Absurd Occupation. The royal mattress tester did not simply appear one day, fully formed and ready to flop onto suspicious bedding. No, like most things in the monarchy, the position was born out of a mix of paranoia, bureaucracy, and a king who once woke up with an inexplicable rash. The origins of the role were murky, buried beneath layers of courtly revisionism, but if one were to trace its lineage, it would lead back to the reign of King Aldrich, the Uncomfortable. A man whose name was both a descriptor and a warning. Aldrich was not a particularly suspicious ruler by the standards of his time, which meant he only suspected half his court of plotting against him rather than the usual 3/4. His reign was marked by minor squabbles, moderate taxation, and an unshakable belief that his bed was out to get him. It began with a single bad night's sleep, a creaking frame, a lump like a buried fist beneath the feathers, but soon escalated into full-blown certainty that his enemies were targeting him through the very fabric of his rest. The court physician, a man whose primary qualifications were a loud voice and a willingness to blame all ailments on bad humors, was summoned. He prodded the royal mattress with the gravity of a man inspecting a battlefield wound, declared it suspect, and prescribed a thorough investigation. A servant was ordered to sleep upon it first, just to be safe. The servant, a scullery maid named Hester with no particular desire to die for her king, nonetheless obeyed. She spent a fitful night atop the royal bed, half expecting to be stabbed by rogue springs or suffocated by vengeful down. When she awoke unharmed, the king was satisfied for about a week. Then came the incident of the itching sheets. No one ever determined whether it was sabotage, poor laundering, or simply the universe's way of reminding Aldrich that he was mortal. But the aftermath was undeniable. The king spent 3 days scratching himself raw, and the court spent 3 days pretending not to notice. The royal bed was deemed compromised. A second servant was pressed into service, this time a stable boy who had the misfortune of being nearby when the king's paranoia flared. The boy, too, survived the night, but the precedent had been set. If the king could not trust his own bed, someone would have to test it for him, permanently. Thus began the slow, grinding machinery of royal bureaucracy, turning an anxious whim into an official position. The role of royal mattress tester required a very specific type of person, someone expendable enough that no one would miss them if the bed wash poisoned, but trustworthy enough that they wouldn't help poison it. Someone who could spend hours lying perfectly still without falling asleep, lest they be accused of sloth. Someone who understood that their entire purpose in life was to serve as a human shield between the king and inconvenience. The first official appointee was a man named Edwin, chosen primarily because he had no family to complain if he died, and a face so forgettable that the king wouldn't be troubled by his presence. Edwin's duties were simple yet strangely profound. He was to inspect the bed each evening, press his body into its depths like a baker testing dough, and declare it safe for royal repose. If he perished in the process, well, at least the king would be warned. Over time, the role accumulated its own rituals and odd dignities. The tester was given a modest title, Keeper of the Royal Rest, and a badge of office in the form of a small decorative pillow he was required to carry at all times, as if to remind the court that his entire identity was now tied to bedding. He was permitted to dine on the scraps of the king's table, provided he didn't make eye contact with anyone important while doing so. And, in a stroke of dark humor, he was granted the right to be buried in the royal cemetery, though in a far corner, under a marker that simply read occupied. Generations passed. King's deed were replaced, and promptly developed their own suspicions about their beds. The royal mattress tester endured, a silent, supine fixture of court life. No one questioned the absurdity of it, because absurdity was the foundation upon which the monarchy was built. After all, if a king could declare war over a spilled goblet of wine, why shouldn't he employ a man to lie on his mattress? And so the tester's legacy continued, unbroken and unquestioned. A profession born from one man's itch, and sustained by the unshakable belief that even the softest featherbed might conceal a knife. Chapter 3. The daily grind of a human guinea pig. The life of a royal mattress tester was not one of glamour, nor was it one of leisure. It was a life of meticulous tedium, punctuated by moments of abject terror whenever the king developed a new allergy. The tester's day began not with the sun, but slightly before it, as if the universe itself had agreed that this particular profession should never know the pleasure of sleeping in. Before the first hint of dawn could stain the sky, the tester, a man named Florian in this particular iteration of the role, was already awake, performing the morning ritual known affectionately among his predecessors as the wrist pinch. This involved slapping his own face and digging his nails into his forearm until he was certain he wouldn't accidentally drift off during the day's first inspection. Falling asleep on duty was a capital offense, not because it endangered the king, but because it suggested the mattress was comfortable, and no monarch wanted to hear that their suffering was optional. Florian dressed in the official uniform, a doublet of deep burgundy, chosen because it didn't show bloodstains, breeches reinforced at the knees, for all the kneeling involved in checking under bed traps, and shoes with suspiciously thick soles in case of hidden nails. His badge of office, that absurd little pillow, was tucked into his belt like a dagger, though it offered no protection beyond the occasional comfort of something soft to scream into. Breakfast was a hurried affair, eaten standing up in the servants' hall while the other staff gave him a wide berth. No one wanted to sit too close to the man whose job was to detect poison by personal experience. The bread was stale, the cheese questionable, and the ale weak, but Florian didn't complain. Complaining was for people whose roles in life weren't fundamentally replaceable. By the time the sun crested the castle walls, Florian was already at work in the royal bedchamber, performing the morning assessment. This involved a series of highly scientific steps, passed down through generations of testers with all the gravity of a sacred rite. First, he would press his hands flat against the mattress and lean his full weight into it, listening for the telltale creaky of a compromised frame. Then he would drag his palms slowly across the surface, feeling for lumps, bumps, or the occasional misplaced dagger. Finally, and this was the part that made his skin crawl, he would lower his face to the sheets and inhale deeply, checking for the bitter almond scent of poison or the musty reek of mold. Only after the bed had been declared temporarily safe would Florian begin the real work, the hourly vigil. From sunrise until the king retired for the night, the tester was required to stand at attention beside the bed, watching for any sign of tampering. This was less about actual security and more about giving the monarch the illusion of safety, like a human scarecrow meant to frighten away assassins and dust mites alike. The worst part, Florian often thought, wasn't the boredom or the perpetual backache. It was the nights. Once the king had finally decided to sleep, a decision that could be delayed for hours by royal petulance or an unusually interesting chicken, Florian's true test began. He would wait in the antechamber, listening to the rustle of silk as the king settled in, counting the seconds until the royal snores began. Only then would he creep back into the bedchamber and perform the final, most humiliating ritual, the midnight comfort check. This involved lying gingerly atop the covers, never wonder that privilege was reserved for royalty, and remaining perfectly still for exactly 1 hour, gauging whether the mattress retained its shape, its support, and its lack of lethal surprises. It was agony. Florian had to fight every instinct in his body to stay awake, to resist the siren call of the very comfort he was meant to assess. One twitch, one snore, and he risked being labeled a negligent employee, or worse, a man who found the royal bed lacking. When the hour was up, he would rise stiffly, straighten his doublet, and bow to the empty room like a man thanking an audience that didn't exist. Then, and only then, could he retreat to his own quarters, a glorified closet near the kitchens, where his own mattress was little more than a sack of straw and regrets. Florian would lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the king's mattress had felt just a bit too soft that night, or if the faint itch between his shoulder blades was the beginnings of a rash or just his own unraveling sanity. And then, because the universe had a sense of humor, the whole cycle would begin again at dawn. Chapter 4. The Science of Sleep, or Lack Thereof. The royal mattress tester did not simply press his hands against fabric and call it a day. His profession was governed by an intricate web of medieval sleep science, a collection of superstitions, half-baked theories, and the occasional startlingly accurate observation that together formed the foundation of royal slumber standards. To understand why Florian had to sniff sheets like a bloodhound and count the threads in every pillowcase, one needed to appreciate the delicate medieval balance between medicine and madness. Sleep, according to the court physicians, was not a natural state, but a precarious negotiation with the body's four humors. Too much blood made one restless, too much phlegm induced dangerous lethargy, and an imbalance of yellow bile could cause the sleeper to rise in a murderous fury. Black bile was the worst offender. Its presence in the mattress could supposedly seep into the king's pores and inspire melancholic poetry, which everyone agreed was worse than assassination attempts from an administrative standpoint. These beliefs manifested in exacting mattress specifications that made Florian's life a waking nightmare. The ideal royal mattress had to be firm enough to prevent phlegmatic congestion, yet soft enough to avoid stirring yellow bile through excessive tossing and turning. It needed precisely 17 pounds of goose down from birds raised in moonlit pastures. Sun-exposed feathers allegedly carried solar agitation, stuffed into a casing woven by left-handed virgins during a waning moon. The thread count was decreed by royal astrologers based on planetary alignments. Too few threads and evil spirits could slip between the fibers. Too many and the sleeper might become overwrapped in worldly concerns. Florian's testing procedures reflected this pseudoscience in all its absurd glory. Each morning began with a humoral press test. He would lie diagonally across the mattress while a physician timed how long it took for his body to leave an impression. Less than 3 minutes indicated dangerous softness, while retaining an imprint beyond 7 minutes provoked fears of black bile accumulation. The physicians would then examine Florian's tongue and urine for signs of humor imbalance, as if his body had become some sort of living mattress barometer. The afternoons were devoted to the elaborate farce known as aerial purity testing. Medieval physicians believed night air carried miasmas that could kill a man in his sleep, so Florian had to wave lit candles around the bed to observe the flame's behavior. A flickering flame and corrupt air pockets in the mattress, requiring immediate restuffing and 3 rounds of Hail Marys. Sometimes the royal apothecary would make him bury small samples of mattress filling in the castle herb garden to see if anything grew, mold being an obvious danger, but suspiciously vigorous plant life suggesting the presence of vegetative spirits that might steal the king's vitality as he slept. The most dreaded test came each fortnight, the lunar alignment evaluation. Under the watchful eyes of the court astronomer, Florian would lie motionless on the mattress from moonrise to moonset, while scholars debated whether his breathing patterns matched the current astrological climate. Any sneeze during Mercury retrograde or yawn during a Venusian ascension required complete mattress replacement and a day of penitent fasting for the tester. What made these rituals particularly galling was how they contradicted each other with whimsical inconsistency. The same physician who declared a mattress too buoyant for proper humoral drainage one week would condemn its replacement as insufficiently supportive for lunar harmonization the next. The royal astrologer and the head physician maintained a bitter feud over whether mattress orientation should follow magnetic north or zodiacal constellations, resulting in Florian having to rotate the bed 4 times daily during equinoxes. Through it all, Florian developed a private theory that all this rigmarole existed not to protect the king's health, but to justify the employment of dozens of otherwise useless court functionaries. The mattress testing protocols had grown so convoluted that they now supported an entire ecosystem of quacks and charlatans, feather purity inspectors, stitching sanctifiers, even a nocturnal energy surveyor, whose sole job was to sleep in the bed once a month and record his dreams for analysis. Yet for all their elaborate theories, The medieval sleep experts consistently missed the actual threats. No physician ever noticed the slow sink of Florian's shoulders after years of bearing weight on lumpy mattresses. No astrologer charted the dark circles beneath his eyes from perpetual sleep deprivation. And when the royal bed developed a suspicious sag in the spring of 1387, it was Florian's aching back, not humoral theory, that correctly identified where a chambermaid had been stealing handfuls of stuffing to make herself a pillow. Perhaps this was the true purpose of the royal mattress tester in the end, not to apply the dubious science of the age, but to suffer its consequences so the king wouldn't have to. While scholars debated celestial influences and physicians prescribed leechings for poor sleep humors, Florian's body kept count of the real costs in slipped discs and chronic exhaustion. The mattress might pass every mystical examination with flying colors, but it was the tester who truly bore the weight of the monarchy's restless nights. Chapter 5. The Perils of Poor Padding. The royal archives contained many records of executions, traitors beheaded, witches burned, and the occasional unlucky jester who discovered that mocking a monarch's receding hairline was a capital offense. But buried among these well-documented punishments were the quieter, sadder tales of the royal mattress testers who had failed in their duty. Their stories served as cautionary whispers among the current crop of testers, passed down like folk tales to remind them that a lumpy mattress could be as deadly as a headsman's axe. The first recorded case of a tester meeting an untimely end over bedding complaints occurred during the reign of King Baldric the Bruiser, a ruler whose nickname stemmed equally from his prowess in battle and his tendency to rise in a foul temper when his sleep was disturbed. The unfortunate tester, a man known only as Alaric the Unlucky, had made the fatal mistake of approving a mattress stuffed with what turned out to be inferior duck down rather than the required goose feathers. King Baldric awoke after his first night on the substandard bedding with a crick in his neck and murder in his heart. When it was discovered that Alaric had certified the mattress as exceptionally cloud-like just the evening before, the king's response was swift and brutal. Alaric was sentenced to spend a month sleeping on the offending mattress in the dungeon, a punishment that might have been survivable had the jailers not interpreted sleeping on the mattress to mean being strapped to it vertically like a human tapestry. By the third day, his legs had swollen terribly from lack of circulation. By the second week, he began hallucinating conversations with the mattress itself. When the month finally ended, Alaric was released, only to immediately throw himself down a well, reportedly screaming something about the feathers whispering. Then there was the tragic case of Mistress Beatrice, the first and only woman to serve as royal mattress tester, appointed during the brief reign of Queen Marguerite the Fastidious. Beatrice had been selected for her keen sense of smell and her reputation for honesty, qualities that proved to be her undoing. When she reported a faint but persistent odor of wet dog emanating from the Queen's new state bed, the royal upholsterers took offense. They accused Beatrice of having an unclean nose and suggested the odor was actually her own. The matter might have ended there had Queen Marguerite not detected the smell herself 2 nights later, during an important diplomatic sleepover with the Duchess of Burgundy. The resulting scandal, known thereafter as the Night of the Stinking Bed, saw Beatrice stripped of her position and sentenced to clean the castle kennels indefinitely. She might have endured even this humiliation had she not made one final fatal mistake, suggesting that perhaps the royal hound's bedding was of higher quality than the Queen's. They found her body in the kennel the next morning, buried under a pile of suspiciously fresh and comfortable-looking dog beds. Perhaps the most inventive punishment befell Tester Godwin during the rule of King Ferdinand the Perpetually Exhausted. Godwin had committed the cardinal sin of falling asleep during an official mattress inspection. Not just briefly nodding off, he had entered such a deep slumber that servants reported hearing snoring from 3 chambers away. When finally shaken awake by a horrified chamberlain, Godwin had the poor judgment to yawn and remark that the mattress was the finest he'd ever encountered. King Ferdinand, who hadn't experienced uninterrupted sleep in 17 years, saw this as a personal insult. His sentence was cruel in its poetic justice. Godwin would be kept awake for 7 days and nights straight, forced to test every mattress in the kingdom while teams of servants took shifts poking him with sharpened quills whenever his eyelids drooped. On the 6th day, a delirious Godwin attempted to strangle a pile of hay, believing it to be the Sandman conspiring against him. He died shortly after completing his sentence, his final words being a whispered apology to an especially plush footstool. These tales were mandatory reading for all new testers. Florian had them recited to him during his training by a wheezing old tester named Oswin, whose back was permanently hunched from years of mattress inspections. Oswin would punctuate each story by tilting his head to show the ragged scar across his neck, a souvenir from when King Ethelred the Sensitive had thrown a bedside goblet at him for failing to detect that a feather had been poking upward with malicious intent. The lesson was clear. In the royal court, a poorly stuffed mattress was more than an inconvenience. It was treason. The difference between a tester who survived his tenure and one who ended up as a cautionary tale often came down to semantics. One never reported that a mattress was lumpy, rather it lacked consistent royal support. Sheets were never scratchy. They exhibited excessive textile enthusiasm. And if a tester absolutely had to admit that bedding was subpar, he must always phrase it as the fault of some already disgraced noble or incompetent servant, never the tester's own judgment. Florian had taken these lessons to heart. He developed a whole vocabulary of euphemisms to describe mattress flaws without assigning blame. A sunken middle became an intentional depression to cradle royal majesty. Loose stitching was evidence of artisanal flexibility. When he once encountered what was clearly a dead mouse sewn into a pillow, likely by a disgruntled chambermaid, he diplomatically reported it as an organic reinforcement to maintain law. This verbal dance was exhausting but necessary. While the kings and queens came and went, one truth remained constant. It was always better to be the tester who called a bed firm than the one who admitted it felt like sleeping on a bag of rocks. Even if the king would eventually discover the truth, by then the tester might have at least a slim chance to blame the upholsterers, the feather merchants, or, if all else failed, an act of God. As Florian lay on yet another questionable royal mattress, feeling what distinctly seemed like a loose spring pressing against his kidney, he carefully composed his report in his head. "Your Majesty's bedding demonstrates remarkable structural integrity," he would say. "So much so that it provides constant tactile reminders of its robust construction." The king would either understand the message or he wouldn't. But Florian intended to keep his head attached either way. Chapter 6. Luxury or Torture. The materials of the trade. The royal mattress was not so much a piece of furniture as a battleground of competing discomforts, each material vying to prove its worth through sheer aristocratic inconvenience. What commoners imagined as lavish comfort, layers of down, sheets softer than a courtier's lies, was in reality an ever-changing experiment in how many exotic substances could be stuffed beneath a monarch before it became technically classified as assault. Florian had developed a sort of professional taxonomy of torment when it came to royal bedding materials. There were the classics like horsehair, coarse strands that poked through even the thickest ticking like tiny daggers, each one positioned by fate to jab precisely at a pressure point. The royal upholsterers insisted horsehair provided essential spinal alignment, but Florian privately believed its true purpose was to remind kings they were mortal. Then came wool, packed so densely it could stop an arrow, and often did, the resulting mats of fiber hardening over time into something resembling geological strata. A wool mattress didn't so much conform to the body as demand the body conform to it, leaving testers with imprints that lasted for days like badges of suffering. But these were the pedestrian options. Royalty demanded novelty, which meant Florian had encountered fillings that would make a taxidermist blush. There was the infamous swan-down phase, where each mattress required the breast feathers of 300 birds, plucked live during the full moon for lunar vitality. The result was a sleeping surface so buoyant that testers had to be tethered to the bed frame to avoid floating away, a genuine concern after tester Oswin had drifted into a chandelier during a particularly overstuffed rain. Crushed velvet represented a special circle of hell. While sumptuous to the eye, the fabric had a nap so aggressive it could peel skin like cheese, rind after a night's contact. Florian still bore faint stripes across his back from the great velvet incident of '89, when Queen Isabella had insisted on being cradled by crimson luxury. The testers who followed him took to wearing linen undergarments during inspections, though this led to its own problems when the laundresses began stealing them to make church vestments. The most cursed innovation, however, was spider silk. Imported at staggering expense from some distant land where spiders grew as large as dinner plates, the shimmering threads were woven into coverlets that were lighter than air and stronger than chainmail. They were also, Florian discovered, nearly impossible to clean. A single drop of wine would stain irrevocably, leading to hysterical accusations of tester clumsiness. Worse still, the silk conducted static electricity with terrifying efficiency. More than one drowsy monarch had been jolted awake by sparks jumping from bedpost to crown, with predictable consequences for the testing staff. Pillows presented their own unique horrors. The fashion for scented slumber meant they were often stuffed with herbs that ranged from the pungent to the psychotropic. Lavender was tolerable, if overpowering. But the mint phase had testers waking with weeping eyes and throbbing heads, their dreams haunted by visions of enormous chewing peasants. The chamomile period was worse. The flowers attracted bees that somehow always found their way inside the royal bedchamber, leading to panicked swordplay against buzzing intruders. The bed frames themselves were instruments of subtle torture. Carved from wood so dense it barely qualified as plant matter, they groaned under their own weight like dying whales. Gilded edges caught the light, and occasionally stray limbs with equal brilliance. The posts were invariably topped with ornate finials that served no purpose beyond giving bats somewhere to perch before swooping down to startle sleeping royalty. Florian often wondered if there was some deeper philosophy behind all this calculated discomfort. Perhaps it was meant to remind kings that even in sleep, they could never fully relax. Or maybe it was simply that the richer one became, the further one drifted from understanding what actual comfort felt like. The peasant sleeping on straw at least knew his bed was rough. The nobleman tossing on swan's down convinced himself the problem was his own inability to appreciate luxury. One thing was certain. The materials changed with the seasons, but the suffering remained constant. As Florian gingerly lowered himself onto a new mattress, stuffed with what appeared to be shredded seashells, promoting marine vitality according to the latest physician's craze, he took small comfort in knowing this too would pass. Either the fashion would change, or he would develop calluses in places no man should have calluses. The seashells crunched ominously beneath him. Somewhere, a nobleman was commissioning a bed stuffed with porcupine quills. Florian sighed, adjusted his ceremonial pillow, and began another night's vigil, human litmus test for the endless folly of royal comfort. Chapter 7. The Secret Diplomacy of Bedding. In the grand chessboard of European royal politics, where marriages were brokered like livestock trades and wars began over poorly chosen dessert wines, the humble mattress served as both weapon and peace offering. A royal bed was never simply a place to sleep. It was a statement, a negotiation table, and occasionally a declaration of war. Florian learned this truth the hard way during the infamous pillow crisis of 1392, when a poorly stuffed bolster nearly unraveled 50 years of careful diplomacy with Burgundy. The incident began innocently enough. Duke Philip of Burgundy sent his new bride, Princess Marguerite, to the French court with an extravagant dowry that included what was touted as the finest bed in Christendom. The mattress, stuffed with the down of albino geese bred exclusively in Burgundian monasteries, represented both the Duke's wealth and his delicate sensibilities. The geese were said to be so pure they wept holy tears when plucked. When Florian performed his initial inspection, he immediately noticed the problem. The Burgundians had stuffed the mattress according to their own regional preferences, firm at the head for proper spinal alignment, gradually softening toward the foot to cradle royal ankles. Unfortunately, the French royal family subscribed to the opposing school of thought. A mattress should be uniformly soft as a show of absolute luxury, with only peasants and soldiers needing support. What followed was a diplomatic catastrophe played out in feathers and ticking. King Charles VI took one night on the Burgundian bed and awoke in a fury, declaring the mattress an insult to French sophistication and the marriage contract possibly void due to intentional discomfort. The Burgundian ambassador retorted that the French preference for mushy bedding was evidence of moral decay. Florian spent 3 sleepless nights trying to mediate, at one point attempting to discreetly remove handfuls of stuffing from the head section while the Burgundian guards weren't looking. The crisis was only resolved when Florian, in a moment of desperate inspiration, suggested the mattress be ceremonially baptized in French wine to bless its transition to French standards. This ridiculous bit of theater satisfied both parties' honor, though the resulting stain required an entirely new coverlet and launched a brief but intense fashion for wine-colored bedding among the nobility. Such incidents were commonplace in the covert world of royal bedding diplomacy. Every aspect of a mattress carried political weight. The sourcing of materials signaled alliances, the stitching patterns hinted at religious affiliations. Even the choice of bed warmer could be interpreted as commentary on foreign relations. When King Henry IV of England married Joanna of Navarre, the negotiations nearly collapsed over her insistence on bare fur undersheets. A Navarrese tradition that English physicians claimed caused excessive heat in the loins. Florian's role in these delicate matters extended far beyond simple comfort assessment. He became a bedding diplomat, trained to recognize the subtle messages woven into each thread. A mattress stuffed with Spanish moss, a quiet nod to the Aragonese alliance. Hungarian goose down arranged in a spiral pattern, a discreet acknowledgement of the Hunyadi family's growing influence. Even the direction of the stitching mattered, east-west for propal sympathies, north-south for those with imperial leanings. The most perilous moments came during royal weddings, when 2 competing bedding traditions collided in what Florian privately called the nocturnal summit. He developed a repertoire of tactics to smooth over these culture clashes. When Byzantine Princess Anna insisted on her traditional gold-woven sleep sack, despite French preferences for open bedding, Florian brokered a compromise by having the sack lined with French silk and declaring it a chrysalis of unity. When the notoriously firm sleeping Danish delegation visited, he secretly inserted thin, down mattresses atop their preferred boards, achieving a middle ground that left everyone moderately dissatisfied, the hallmark of any good political solution. These bedding negotiations carried real stakes. The War of the Sicilian Sheets, 1347 to 1350, began when Queen Constance of Sicily awoke with back pain after sleeping on a Neapolitan-made mattress and took it as a deliberate provocation. The Peace of Utrecht included an entire annex regulating acceptable pillow sizes for diplomatic guest chambers. Even the Great Schism had its bedding-related dimensions. The Avignon papacy favored wool-stuffed mattresses, while Rome stuck stubbornly to horsehair, creating a theological divide that outlasted the actual split in the church. Through it all, Florian navigated these treacherous waters with the skill of a seasoned ambassador and the caution of a man who knew his head rested as precariously as the monarch's on any given night's pillow. He developed a sixth sense for detecting when a foreign delegation's compliments about the bedding were actually veiled insults, when a gift of new sheets concealed an attempt to shift political alliances. Most importantly, when to pretend he didn't understand the subtext at all. The greatest test of his diplomatic skills came during the visit of the Holy Roman Emperor, whose entourage included not just the usual complement of nobles and guards, but also his personal mattress tester, a hulking German named Gottfried, who viewed Florian as both professional rival and cultural enemy. Their first meeting nearly came to blows when Gottfried declared French down effeminate and Florian retorted that German horsehair stuffing explained much about imperial temperament. Yet by the third night, Through shared suffering, the emperor insisted on sleeping on a board covered only by a wolf pelt to maintain warrior vigor. The two testers developed a grudging respect. They exchanged tips for surviving royal whims. Gottfried's trick of keeping spare feathers in his sleeves to silently adjust mattress firmness. Florian's method of using candle smoke to test for poison without appearing suspicious. By week's end, they had jointly crafted a mattress that satisfied both traditions. Firm enough to please German sensibilities, but with just enough give to meet French standards of luxury. When the emperor pronounced it adequate and King Charles declared it not entirely barbaric, Florian knew he'd achieved the pinnacle of bedding diplomacy. A solution that left all parties equally unhappy, and therefore willing to accept it. As Gottfried departed, he pressed a small dagger into Florian's hand, both a threat and a professional courtesy, while muttering something about next time in heavily accented French. Florian kept the dagger sharp and ready. In the world of royal bedding, tomorrow's peace treaty could become tonight's casus belli with one poorly placed feather. The true test of a mattress tester wasn't detecting lumps. It was sensing when those lumps might topple kingdoms. Chapter 8. A Night in the Life. Testing for trouble. Midnight in the royal bedchamber was not a time of peace, but rather the witching hour when all the absurdities of court life condensed into a single, endless stretch of torment for the royal mattress tester. Florian had long since accepted that his nights were less about sleep and more about maintaining the delicate illusion that royal slumber was a sacred, undisturbed ritual rather than the chaotic farce it actually was. The evening always began with the changing of the bedding, a ceremony more elaborate than some military parades. A procession of chambermaids entered at precisely 11:30, bearing fresh linens that had been in and blessed by no fewer than 3 priests, one for the father, one for the son, and one specifically for preventing feather clumping. Florian stood at rigid attention as they worked, watching for any signs of sabotage. A maid lingering too long near the pillows, a suspicious bulge in the mattress ticking, or worse, the dreaded scented sachet of unknown origin that some queen or another would invariably insist upon, despite everyone knowing it would trigger the king's allergies by dawn. Once the bed was prepared, a process involving more tucking, smoothing, and ritual incantations than a ship launching, Florian began the official inspection. He started with the pillow plump test, a delicate operation that required him to press his face into each pillow in turn, inhale deeply, searching for the telltale almond-sweet whiff of poison, or the musty reek of improperly cured feathers, and then give it 3 firm pats to assess resilience. Too soft, and the king would wake with neck cramps and a temper. Too firm, and the royal head would bounce like a melon on a drum. Only Florian's experienced touch could determine the exact Goldilocks-approved middle ground. Next came the mattress meander, a slow, deliberate crawl across the surface of the bed on hands and knees, feeling for lumps, divots, or, God forbid, a misplaced pea. The infamous Pea Proclamation of 1381 had declared that any tester who failed to detect a legume-sized irregularity would be demoted to turnspit in the kitchens, a fate considered worse than execution by most. Florian had developed an elaborate mental map of pressure points, his fingers tracing invisible grids across the fabric, alert for even the slightest deviation from perfect smoothness. Just as he was about to declare the bed safe for royal occupation, the first disturbance of the night arrived, the phantom itch. Somewhere between the 3rd and 4th feather check, an unholy tingling would spread across Florian's back, demanding immediate attention but impossible to scratch without breaking protocol. Was it a stray thread? A burrowing insect? The beginnings of a plague? Florian had no choice but to endure, standing rigid as the itch migrated from shoulder blade to spine like a tiny sadistic explorer. By the time the clock struck 12, the king would finally deign to retire, though retire was a generous term for what was essentially a theatrical production entitled His Majesty Considers Maybe Sleeping Eventually. There were the obligatory complaints about drafts, investigated by no fewer than 4 pages, holding candles aloft to track non-existent breezes. The ritual rejection of the first pillow arrangement, too high, too low, too symmetrical, and the inevitable last-minute demand for warmed milk that would go untouched, but had to be present lest the king feel neglected. Only when the royal bulk had finally settled beneath the covers, with the dramatic sigh of a man preparing to brave the elements rather than a mattress stuffed with enough down to bankrupt a small village, could Florian begin his vigil of perpetual discomfort. This involved standing motionless at the foot of the bed for an hour, watching the king's breathing for any sign of disturbance that might reflect poorly on the bedding. Every snore was analyzed for discontent. Every twitch was scrutinized for evidence of lumps. Of course, the universe conspired to make this task impossible. Just as Florian's eyelids would grow heavy, one of the following would inevitably occur. The mysterious hearth pop. A log in the fireplace would crack with the precision of a trained assassin, sending Florian into a heart-pounding alertness as he waited to see if the king would wake in a fury. The passing page's misstep. Some hapless servant, tasked with replenishing candles, would misjudge the creaky floorboard near the wardrobe and freeze mid-step like a startled deer while Florian willed him into invisibility. The royal midnight snack, a sudden craving for marzipan or spiced wine, would strike the king, resulting in a flurry of servants and Florian having to retest the mattress all over again once the royal backside had left its imprint. And then, just when it seemed the night might settle into something resembling quiet, the owls would begin. The royal bedchamber's windows, by some cursed architectural oversight, aligned perfectly with a family of particularly vocal barn owls who held their nightly councils, just as the king was drifting off. Their hoots sounded eerily like mocking laughter, a fact not lost on His Majesty, who had once demanded the entire flock be tried for treason. The court falconer had solved the problem by releasing a trained hawk every evening at 11, leading to a tense but silent standoff between birds of prey that Florian considered the most functional relationship in the castle. Dawn approached with cruel slowness. Florian's feet swelled in his boots. His knees developed the approximate flexibility of dried twigs. The ceremonial pillow tucked under his arm grew heavier with each passing hour, until it felt less like a badge of office and more like a sentence. And then, at long last, the first gray light would creep through the windows. The king would stir, blink blearily, and pronounce either adequate high praise, or I dreamed of being trampled by sheep, a condemnation that would send Florian and the entire bedding staff into frantic diagnostics. As he staggered from the chamber, his back a symphony of pops and creaks rivaling the castle's old floors, Florian would console himself with one thought. Tonight he had survived. Tomorrow night, and all its attendant absurdities, would just have to wait. Chapter 9. The Rise and Fall of the Royal Bedding Guild. Like all great institutions that outlive their usefulness, the Royal Bedding Guild began with noble intentions and ended in a morass of bureaucracy, infighting, and a shocking number of feather-related scandals. Founded during the reign of King Louis the Particular, so named for his habit of executing servants who folded his nightshirts incorrectly, the guild was originally conceived as a way to bring standards to the chaotic world of royal sleep. Before its creation, mattress testers were chosen haphazardly. Drunks pulled from taverns, prisoners offered reduced sentences, or particularly unlucky stable boys who happened to be standing near a nobleman with a restless night ahead. The guild changed all that. Prospective testers underwent 7 years of rigorous apprenticeship, learning everything from the proper way to sniff a pillow, 3 short inhalations through the nose while maintaining eye contact with a superior, lest one appear to be enjoying it too much, to the complex mathematics of feather distribution. The guildmaster, a severe man named Thibault, with a permanently arched eyebrow from years of finding bedding unsatisfactory, ruled over this process with the absolute authority of a pope and twice the pettiness. Their headquarters, known as the Down House, a name that amused exactly no one after the 1st century, became a labyrinth of workshops and testing chambers. Here, Apprentices practiced detecting imperfections in progressively more absurd scenarios, identifying a single lump in a mattress while blindfolded, assessing pillow firmness while balancing on one foot, and the dreaded midnight disturbance drill, where senior members would sneak into the dormitories to drop hot coals on apprentices' beds to test their alert. Those who cried out or moved too slowly were demoted to chamber pot scrubbers. At its height, the guild wielded surprising influence. Their seal of approval could make or break bedding merchants across Europe. A guild-certified tester could command wages that put some minor nobles to shame. The annual Feather Fair, where merchants displayed their finest down for inspection, became a riotous festival of bribery, espionage, and at least one recorded instance of avian-related assault. But like all institutions built upon a foundation of nonsense, the guild's downfall was inevitable. The first cracks appeared during the Great Pillow Schism of 1422, when a faction of progressive testers began advocating for a radical new stuffing technique involving layered duck and goose feathers. Traditionalists, who believed in pure goose down packed according to astrological signs, declared this heresy. The resulting feud split the guild in two, with testers taking to the streets in rival factions distinguished by the color of their ceremonial pillows: white for goose purists, speckled for the duck blend reformers. King Charles II, tired of being woken by chanting testers outside his window, finally intervened by declaring all bedding debates treasonous and banishing the ringleaders to the linen mines of Flanders. This should have been the end of it, but the damage was done. The guild's reputation for impartiality had been shattered, and soon even minor nobles were hiring independent testers rather than paying the guild's exorbitant certification fees. The final blow came from an unexpected quarter: technology. The invention of the mechanical stuffing machine in 1486 rendered obsolete the guild's most sacred ritual, the hand fluff ceremony, where master testers would personally massage each handful of feathers to awaken their loft potential. Younger testers began leaving to work in the new factories, where the pay was better and one didn't have to spend years memorizing 17 different ways to describe a slightly firm pillow. By the time Florian joined in the early 1500s, the once proud guild was a shadow of its former self. Down House had fallen into disrepair, its great feather-stuffed halls now home to more mice than masters. The few remaining apprentices, trained not under the watchful eye of seasoned professionals, but from a single badly copied manual titled Art of Not Getting Executed Over Bedding. Florian's own initiation had been a farce. After paying 3 months' wages for the privilege, he was led to a dusty cellar where a rheumy-eyed old tester named Gerard had him swear an oath on a moth-eaten pillow. The examination consisted of Gerard poking a mattress twice, declaring it probably fine, and then falling asleep mid-certification. When Florian tried to rouse him, he was handed his tester's badge, a tarnished piece of tin with a feather poorly scratched into it, and told to report for duty the next morning. Now, as he walked past the boarded-up guild hall on his way to another night of royal service, Florian sometimes fancied he could hear the ghosts of testers past, the whisper of feathers being fluffed, the faint echoes of long-forgotten pillow debates, and perhaps, if he listened very closely, the sound of Thibault spinning in his grave at the thought of mechanical stuff. The guild was dead. Long live the guild, and may its pillows remain forever lumpy in the afterlife. Chapter 10. Famous and infamous mattress testers in history. While the royal mattress tester might seem like an obscure footnote in the grand chronicles of history, the profession produced its fair share of remarkable scoundrels, heroes, and at least one individual who managed to be both simultaneously. The annals of royal courts across Europe are littered with tales of testers who transcended their humble job descriptions to leave marks far more lasting than the indentations they made on expensive bedding. Perhaps the most legendary figure in tester history was Bertrand the Unshakable, who served 3 consecutive French kings during the 100 Years' War. Bertrand earned his moniker not through any particular steadfastness of character, but because he once slept through an actual English siege on the castle. While arrows rained down and panic gripped the court, Bertrand remained blissfully unconscious atop the royal mattress, demonstrating what future generations would call professional dedication, and his contemporaries called a miraculous survival instinct. When finally awakened by a terrified chambermaid, he reportedly yawned, declared the mattress satisfactory under siege conditions, and went back to sleep. King Charles XVI was so impressed by this display of indifference to mortal danger that he granted Bertrand lands, a title, and permanent exemption from being on the front lines of anything. On the opposite end of the spectrum was Marguerite de Chambray, the only tester in history to be canonized as a saint. Her martyrdom came not through dramatic self-sacrifice, but through the slow, grinding torture of dealing with Queen Isabella of Bavaria's sleeping habits. Marguerite's journals, preserved in the Vatican archives under examples of extreme patience, detail 12 years of nightly torment, being forced to test beds still warm from the Queen's baths, surviving on scraps of food tossed from the royal table, and once spending an entire winter sleeping on a suspiciously lumpy mattress that turned out to contain the Queen's missing jewelry collection. Marguerite was finally granted sainthood after her death from exhaustion and possibly spite, with the official citation praising her Christ-like ability to turn the other cheek when slapped by royal pillows. Then there was the curious case of Henrik the Forgetful, a Danish tester whose inability to remember which mattresses he'd already inspected led to the creation of the first standardized testing checklist. Henrik's method was simplicity itself. He would test every mattress in the castle in sequence until he found one that felt familiar, then declare it safe through process of elimination. This system worked surprisingly well until the night King Eric of Pomerania awoke atop what was clearly a dining table cushion stuffed with old socks. Henrik's subsequent demotion to turnspit led directly to the development of written inspection protocols, though modern historians suspect the sock mattress incident was actually an early attempt at unionization through malicious compliance. But no history of mattress testers would be complete without the infamous Gilles de Rais, better known as the tester who would be king. De Rais began his career as an unremarkable, if slightly too ambitious member of the French Royal Testing Corps. His downfall came when he realized that his unique position, being one of the few people who could approach the royal bed unchallenged, gave him unprecedented access to the monarchy's most vulnerable hours. Over the course of 3 years, de Rais built a network of co-conspirators among the chambermaids and feather merchants, using coded messages hidden in pillow seams to coordinate what would have been the most audacious regicide in French history. The plot was only discovered when a suspiciously heavy mattress, ordered by de Rais, split open during testing, revealing not the promised Hungarian goose down, but enough weaponry to outfit a small rebellion. The subsequent investigation uncovered ledgers detailing bribes to bedding suppliers, sketches of the castle's weak points hidden in embroidery patterns, and, perhaps most damningly, de Rais's personal notes complaining that the king's tossing and turning was disrupting my concentration on treason. De Rais's execution was a spectacle even by medieval standards. He was strapped to an enormous replica mattress and slowly crushed beneath progressively heavier pillows, while the royal heralds read aloud his list of bedding complaints. The event was so popular it spawned an entire genre of theatrical farces called mattress comedies, though modern scholars suspect much of the humor was lost in translation. More recent centuries saw the decline of tester notoriety, though a few figures stand out. There was the Bavarian tester Josef Müller, who invented the modern box spring after years of back pain from testing too firm royal mattresses. The Italian tester Giovanni Battista, who wrote the first and last philosophical treatise on the nature of comfort, concluding after 800 pages that all beds are prisons, some simply have better drapes. And of course the English tester Reginald Pillsbury, who holds the distinction of being the only man to die from being stabbed with a decorative pillow tassel, a weapon chosen by his assassin specifically for the irony. These stories, often overlooked in favor of more conventional histories, reveal the strange truth about royal mattress testers, They were at once completely unimportant and absolutely vital, their lives measured in feather counts and near misses with royal tempers. They navigated a world where the wrong adjective to describe a pillow's firmness could mean exile, where their most mundane observations carried unexpected weight, and where the difference between hero and villain often came down to whether they reported that suspicious lump or simply pretended not to notice. Florian often wondered which category history would place him in, if it remembered him at all. Would he be a Bertrand, sleeping through upheavals? A Marguerite, enduring with quiet suffering? Or perhaps, if he wasn't careful, a de Rais, undone by his own ambitions and an overly honest review of the king's snoring habits? Only time would tell. For now there were mattresses to test, and royal tempers to avoid, and that was legacy enough for any tester. Chapter 11. The Curious Case of the Cursed Mattress. Among the many hazards of Florian's profession, the backaches, the feather allergies, the ever-present risk of execution for failing to detect a rogue pea, none filled him with quite the same dread as the appearance of the royal mattress known as La Dormeuse Maudite. The damned sleeper had haunted the French court for nearly a century, appearing at irregular intervals like some terrible fabric-wrapped comet foretelling doom. Its arrival was always preceded by the same sequence of events. First, the king would suffer a particularly bad night's sleep filled with unsettling dreams. Then, the royal physicians would blame the humors, the astrologers would blame the stars, and finally, some hapless courtier would hesitantly suggest that perhaps, just perhaps, the problem might originate from that mattress in the West Wing storage. Florian first encountered La Dormeuse Maudite on a Tuesday, which was already reason enough for suspicion. Tuesdays being traditionally unlucky for royal bedding changes. The mattress had been dragged from its exile in the storerooms by a team of wide-eyed servants who refused to touch it directly, instead using fireplace pokers to push the massive thing along the corridor like men disposing of a dead bear. By the time it reached the royal chambers, rumors had already spread through the castle. The last 3 kings who slept on it had died within a year. A maid who once made it had given birth to a child with feathers for hair, and at least one tester had reportedly vanished into its depths during inspection, leaving behind only a single slipper and a feather stuck to the ceiling. The mattress itself was an unprepossessing monstrosity, slightly larger than standard, with a faded crimson cover embroidered with what appeared to be vines, but upon closer inspection revealed themselves to be hundreds of tiny, writhing figures trapped in some eternal fabric purgatory. Its most distinctive feature was a peculiar indentation in the center that no amount of fluffing could erase, as though something heavy had slept there long enough to leave a permanent impression. Florian's first inspection revealed several alarming qualities. The mattress was impossibly heavy, requiring 6 grown men to lift it. Yet when he pressed his hand against the surface, it yielded with disturbing ease, swallowing his arm up to the elbow before releasing it with a soft, almost disappointed sigh. The stuffing, if one could call it that, shifted under his touch like something alive, rearranging itself the moment he looked away. And the smell, not the usual musty odor of aged feathers, but something darker, like wet earth and extinguished candles. The court physician, a perpetually sweating man named Dr. Leblanc, insisted the mattress was perfectly harmless, citing some dubious treatise about therapeutic night terrors, while keeping a firm grip on a crucifix in his pocket. The royal exorcist disagreed, but couldn't be bothered to do anything about it unless directly ordered by the king. The chambermaids had already begun leaving little offerings of bread and salt around the bed frame, which did nothing except attract mice. That first night, Florian performed his duty with all the enthusiasm of a man walking the plank. The moment he lay down, 3 things became immediately apparent. First, the mattress was unnaturally warm, as though someone had just vacated it moments before. Second, the indentation in the center seemed to be slowly deepening, pulling him toward it with gentle insistence. And third, he could hear whispering, not from the room around him, but from inside the mattress itself, a low murmur. just at the edge of comprehension. What followed was the longest hour of Florian's life. The whispers grew louder, though never quite clear enough to understand. The indentation deepened further, cradling him with disturbing intimacy. Several times he felt what could only be described as fingers, far too many fingers, pressing up against his back through the fabric, never quite breaking through but leaving no doubt about their presence. When he finally rose at the end of his watch, his clothes were damp with sweat that smelled faintly of lavender, and something less pleasant, like meat left too long in the sun. His official report was a masterpiece of understatement. The mattress exhibits unusual properties that may prove distracting to light sleepers. The king, either ignoring or oblivious to the coded warning, declared it interesting and ordered it prepared for his use that very night. What followed was the most documented, and most deliberately ignored, supernatural event in royal sleeping history. The king awoke screaming at precisely 3:33 a.m., claiming something had tried to trade places with him in the night. 3 guards swore they saw the mattress bulge upward, as though something large were moving beneath the covers, though no such creature was ever found. The royal hounds, normally fearless beasts, refused to enter the chamber for a week afterward, and the usually stoic head chambermaid took an unexpected leave of absence to visit a distant nunnery. La Dormeuse Maudite was promptly banished back to storage, this time with an extra lock and a hastily painted cross on the door. Florian, against all odds, received a commendation for his keen observational skills, and a raise that barely covered the cost of the holy water he now added to his nightly wash. The mattress would return twice more during Florian's tenure. Once after a particularly drunk nobleman accidentally had it brought to the guest chambers, resulting in his immediate conversion to priesthood, and again during a bedding shortage caused by an unfortunate incident involving the royal feather supply, and a case of mistaken identity with the court jester's costume. Each encounter left Florian with fresh nightmares and a growing suspicion that the mattress wasn't cursed so much as waiting. Years later, after Florian had retired, alive, which in itself was a minor miracle, he heard rumors that La Dormeuse Maudite had been gifted to an unpopular diplomat from Burgundy. The man reportedly slept like a baby his first night upon it, then vanished completely the second, leaving behind only a satisfied-looking indentation in the fabric and a single perfect feather on the pillow. Florian drank to the mattress's health that night, then burned the sheets on his own bed just to be safe. Some royal traditions, he decided, were better left to history. Chapter 12. From Royal Service to Ridicule. The decline of the royal mattress tester from feared court official to laughingstock was neither sudden nor dignified. Like many obsolete professions, it eroded slowly, one joke at a time, until the very idea that men had once been paid to lie on beds seemed like some bizarre historical prank. The process began innocuously enough. A passing reference in a nobleman's memoir here, a bawdy tavern song there, but soon swelled into a torrent of mockery that not even the most luxurious mattress could cushion. Florian first noticed the shift when a troupe of traveling players performed at court. Amidst the usual fare of morality plays and classical adaptations came a new work titled On the Plight of the Pronin, featuring an exaggerated fool named Testiculo, whose entire purpose was to flop dramatically onto various surfaces, while proclaiming their virtues in ever more ridiculous terms. The king laughed uproariously when the actor declared a pile of rocks, fit for royal buttocks, and a bed of nails suspiciously comfortable. Florian, standing at rigid attention by the real royal bed, felt his cheeks burn with something hotter than embarrassment, the dawning realization that his life's work had become comedy. Soon the pamphleteers took up the cause. Capely printed broadsheets circulated through Paris bearing titles like 100 Uses for a Retired Mattress Tester, Number 3, Doorstop, Provided the Door Isn't Too Heavy, and Why the Secret Language of Feathers, or How to Waste a Perfectly Good Life. A particularly vicious engraving depicted a tester so oblivious he failed to notice the king being murdered beside him. too engrossed in assessing pillow firmness. The caption read, "Priorities of State." The mockery took darker turns in political satire. During the regency of Marie de Medici, a series of anonymous pamphlets compared her advisors to mattress testers. All pomp and ceremony while accomplishing nothing of substance. One particularly bold cartoon showed the entire royal council lying stacked atop each other on a giant bed, while peasants starved below. The authorities burned every copy they could find, which of course only made the image more popular. Even the language shifted to accommodate this new contempt. Fates le testuer became slang for wasting time on meaningless tasks. Calling someone a feather feeler was grounds for duel in polite company. The once proud title of Keeper of the Royal Rest now elicited smirks rather than respect, when it was remembered at all. The final indignity came when the position was quietly phased out during the reign of Louis XIV. The Sun King, never one to tolerate ridicule of his court, simply declared the role archaic and reassigned its duties to the already overworked chamberlains. There was no fanfare, no official decree, just one morning when the royal mattress went uninspected, and no one seemed to notice or care. Florian, by then an old man living on a meager pension, watched this decline with the weary acceptance of someone who had long since stopped expecting dignity. He kept his ceremonial pillow in a chest beneath his bed, taking it out only occasionally to remember when its weight had meant something. The younger servants in his boarding house laughed when they heard of his former profession, until they saw the permanent stoop in his posture from years of bending over beds, or the scars on his back from royal tempers and rogue feathers. Then their laughter died awkwardly in their throats, replaced by something uncomfortably like pity. In his final years, Florian took small comfort in knowing that while history might remember mattress testers as jokes, it would at least remember them. The alternative, being forgotten completely, seemed far worse. And on cold nights when his bones ached with old injuries, he sometimes fancied he could still hear the whispers of La Dormeuse maudite, calling him back to that eternal indentation. But that, of course, was just the wind. Or perhaps the rustling of feathers in a pillow no one bothered to inspect anymore. Chapter 13. The Last Royal Mattress Tester. The end came not with fanfare or ceremony, but with a simple memorandum slipped beneath the door of Claude Dubois' modest quarters in the Versailles servants' wing. The document, penned by some minor functionary in the Ministry of the Royal Household, consisted of 3 lines informing him that his services would no longer be required following the end of the quarter, and that he should please return any royal property in his possession, including but not limited to the ceremonial pillow and measuring instrument. Claude sat on the edge of his bed, an ordinary, unremarkable bed that no one inspected except himself out of professional habit, and read the note 3 times before its meaning fully settled in his bones. He had known this day would come, of course. The writing had been on the wall since the new king dismissed half the royal tasters last year, and the court physicians had begun mumbling about modern sanitation making certain precautions redundant. Still, the finality of it struck him like a poorly stuffed bolster to the ribs. He had been the 7th Claude Dubois to serve as royal mattress tester, a family tradition stretching back to the days when the position still commanded respect. His great-great-great-grandfather had tested beds for Louis XIII, back when doing so required knowledge of astrology and the occasional exorcism. His grandfather regaled him with stories of the great feather shortage of 1729, when an entire wing of the palace had to sleep on straw-filled pallets for a month. His father, before the drink took him, taught him how to distinguish Hungarian goose down from inferior French stock by taste alone, a skill as useless as it was bizarre. Now, at age 53, with a bad knee and a permanently hunched posture from decades of bending over beds, Claude found himself the last in that unbroken line. The last royal mattress tester in France. Possibly in Europe, perhaps in the world. He reported for duty that evening as usual, moving through the familiar rituals by rote. The inspection of the stitching along the edges where poison might be hidden. the careful pressing of hands into the surface to check for lumps or inconsistencies. The ceremonial lying down for exactly 7 minutes. No more, no less, to assess overall comfort. The king wasn't even in residence that evening, off hunting at Fontainebleau, but protocol demanded the bed be prepared regardless. As Claude performed these motions for what he knew would be the final time, he noticed all the little changes that had crept in over the years. The mattress itself was newer, stuffed with some modern material that didn't shift properly under his fingers. The elaborate tester's badge his ancestor had worn with pride had been replaced by a simple tin pin. The pages and chambermaids no longer stood at respectful attention during his inspection, but whispered and giggled in the corners, making no effort to hide their amusement. Only old Marie, the linen keeper who remembered when the position still mattered, treated him with any dignity. She watched silently from her chair by the wardrobe as he completed his assessment, her gnarled hand stilling on her mending when he reached the final step. There had always been an unspoken understanding between them. She who maintained the fabrics, he who tested their worth. Now even that would end. "The mattress is adequate," Claude announced to the empty room, his voice catching on the ancient formula. He couldn't bring himself to say the words that had ended every inspection for generations. Fit for royal repose. The bed was serviceable, certainly, but something about its perfectly even springs and sanitized stuffing felt wrong. A royal mattress should have character, flaws that needed interpreting. This one was just a bed. Marie nodded as if she understood. She probably did. They were the last of a dying breed, relics of a time when every aspect of royal life required specialized attention. In the morning, some junior chamberlain would take over Claude's duties with none of the training or tradition, giving the mattress a cursory glance between dusting and curtain drawing. The world had moved on. Claude removed his badge and set it carefully on the bedside table. The ceremonial pillow, a sad, deflated thing compared to the plush monstrosities of his ancestors, he left folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Let the ministry send someone to collect them. He wouldn't be the one to deliver these remnants of his profession into indifferent hands. As he walked through the palace gates for the last time, Claude found himself remembering his father's final words to him on the subject of mattress testing. "It's not about the bed, boy. It's about the weight you carry between the sheets." At the time, he'd assumed it was just the wine talking. Now, with the moonlight casting long shadows across the courtyard, he thought he might finally understand. The position of royal mattress tester was no more. But Claude Dubois still was, at least for now. He straightened his aching back as best he could and walked into the night, toward whatever came next. Behind him in the vast palace, no one noticed when the king's bed went uninspected for the first time in 500 years. The world, it seemed, would keep turning even without someone to test its softness. Chapter 14. Modern Mattress Testing. A legacy continued. The ghosts of royal mattress testers would hardly recognize their modern counterparts. Gone are the silk doublets and constant fear of execution, replaced by lab coats and ergonomic assessments. But in quiet moments between sleep studies and pressure mapping, the spirit of those long-dead testers lingers, in the way a hand still instinctively presses into a mattress edge, or how the perfect pillow loft is measured not with scientific instruments alone, but with that most ancient tool, the human face. Today's sleep scientists would shudder at the methods of their predecessors. Where Florian once sniffed for poison, modern testers use gas chromatography to detect off-gassing chemicals. The elaborate humoral press test has been replaced by pressure-sensitive mats that generate precise heat maps of body weight distribution. And while Claude Dubois risked his life testing for assassin's needles, contemporary quality control involves automated roller machines that simulate years of wear in a matter of days. Yet some traditions stubbornly persist. The modern equivalent of royal mattress testers, those anonymous souls who evaluate bedding for luxury hotels and high-end manufacturers, still perform the most basic test of all. They lie down. Not for 7 minutes like Claude's ceremonial inspection, but for hours at a stretch in temperature-controlled rooms, assessing what can't be quantified by machines alone. That ineffable quality, the French called "G moelleux," the feeling of sinking into a cloud while somehow being perfectly supported. The language has changed, but the essential questions remain remarkably similar. Where a royal physician once asked if the bedding encouraged proper humoral balance, sleep researchers now discuss spinal alignment and pressure point relief. The elaborate feather stuffing ceremonies of the past have their echo in today's meticulous layering of memory foams and latex. Even the old tester's trick of describing firmness through increasingly absurd euphemisms survives in modern marketing speak. Adaptive response instead of doesn't feel like rocks. Perhaps the most significant difference lies in who benefits from this expertise. Where once an entire profession existed to serve one royal backside, today's mattress testing knowledge, distilled into algorithms and sleep quizzes, helps millions find better rest. The descendants of those peasants who slept on straw now have access to space-age materials and adjustable bases that would make Louis XIV green with envy. Somewhere in the plush conference rooms of mattress companies, in the quiet labs of sleep institutes, the legacy of those long-forgotten testers endures. Their sacrifices, the bad backs, the feather allergies, the occasional unfortunate poisoning, laid the groundwork for our modern understanding of sleep as something precious rather than perilous. The royal mattress testers may be gone, but their ghostly hands still guide ours as we press down on a showroom mattress, searching for that perfect balance between support and comfort that has eluded humanity since we first crawled out of caves onto piles of leaves. The tools have changed. The stakes are lower. But the essential quest remains the same: to find in an imperfect world a perfect night's sleep. And if today's testers occasionally feel a strange kinship when reading about their historical counterparts, perhaps it's because some professions, no matter how modernized, still rest upon the same basic principle. Someone has to be willing to lie down on the job. Chapter 15. The irony of restless royalty. The bitter truth whispered among royal mattress testers, one they dared not speak aloud, was this: the very monarchs who demanded absolute perfection in their sleeping arrangements were almost universally terrible sleepers. Kings who could order the fluffing of 1,000 pillows could not command a single hour of uninterrupted rest. Queens whose beds were stuffed with feathers, collected under full moons, still tossed through the night like peasants on straw. The grand irony of the profession was that its existence owed itself to rulers who could not sleep, yet blamed everything but themselves for their wakefulness. King Louis of France was said to have kept 3 generations of mattress testers in constant employment, cycling through them as he did his nightly anxieties. His bedchamber became a theater of sleep-related paranoia, windows sealed against imagined drafts, candles burning at precise intervals to ward off nocturnal imbalances, and a rotation of identical mattresses so he could switch between them when one developed a grudge against him. His testers grew hollow-eyed and jumpy, not from their own lack of sleep, but from listening to the king's endless complaints about his. The royal physicians prescribed everything from warm milk with crushed pearls to the application of leeches behind the ears. Nothing worked. Louis dit exhausted, surrounded by the most luxurious bedding Europe could produce, having never experienced a truly good night's rest in his adult life. The phenomenon was not limited to France. Across Europe, the annals of royal courts told similar tales. Henry VIII's notorious restlessness was blamed successively on by his wives, his ministers, and once, memorably, on a tester who made the mistake of declaring a mattress too comfortable. The man was briefly imprisoned for over-optimism. Catherine the Great's infamous all-night writings were less a product of inspiration than of chronic insomnia. Even the famously robust Charles V of Spain spent his retirement in a monastery begging the monks for their secret to sleeping through matins, unaware that their secret was simply being too exhausted from manual labor to stay awake. The royal mattress testers knew the truth, of course. They saw the indents where monarchs had twisted their sheets into ropes of frustration. They found the hidden books and correspondence that revealed how many pre-dawn hours were spent awake. They discreetly removed the occasional sedative-laced nightcap that had been drunk in desperation. But they kept their silence because the alternative, admitting that no amount of feather arrangement or silk smoothing could calm a mind burdened with power, was unthinkable. Better to blame a slightly lumpy mattress than confront the inherent restlessness of rule. Modern sleep science would later confirm what these testers understood instinctively. That true rest requires surrender, a letting go impossible for those conditioned to view vulnerability as weakness. The royal bed, for all its luxury, was first and foremost a throne by other means, a place where power neither slept nor slept easily. The tester's real job was not to ensure comfort, but to maintain the fiction that comfort could be ensured, that absolute control extended even to the realm of dreams. Their elaborate rituals were a lullaby for the mighty, a performance of order in the chaotic dark. Perhaps this explains why the most feared phrase in a tester's vocabulary was not lumpy or poorly stuffed, but perfect. A mattress declared perfect left no room for deflection, no excuse for royal wakefulness. The wiser testers learned to always leave some minor flaw to be discovered, a barely detectable unevenness, a feather ever so slightly out of place, something to absorb the blame when dawn found the king hollow-eyed once more. The last royal mattress testers carried this unspoken understanding with them into obscurity. They knew, as they had always known, that true rest could not be mandated by decree nor purchased with gold. That the simplest peasant sleeping on a dirt floor might know more of it than an emperor on a mountain of down. And that their profession, for all its absurdity, had at its heart a noble lie. The pretense that sleep, like all things, bowed to royal will. As the last tester shuffled out of the palace for the final time, he may have taken some small comfort in knowing this. The kings were gone, the profession forgotten, but the great equalizer of wakefulness remained. Power might build palaces and command armies, but it still trembled before the coming of dawn. And no amount of feathers could change that. Chapter 16. Bedtime Stories for the Powerless. The royal mattress tester's existence was never really about mattresses, just as court life was never really about governance. Both were elaborate pantomimes where the participants pretended the stakes were high while secretly knowing better. The tester's solemn inspection of Goosedown mirrored the treasurer's careful counting of coins that would never buy happiness, the chamberlain's precise arrangement of chairs for guests who brought only false smiles, the priest's earnest blessings over food that would turn to ash in royal mouths. The entire court was engaged in variations of the same absurd performance, dressing up meaning where none existed, lest they be forced to confront the terrifying emptiness beneath the velvet drapes. Florian understood this better than most. His nightly ritual of pressing his face into royal pillows was no more ridiculous than the lord of the bedchamber's solemn duty to hand the king his nightshirt, or the official candle snuffer's sacred responsibility to extinguish exactly 17 flames in a particular order. Court protocol dictated that a nobleman must take 3 precise steps backward after addressing the king. No more, no less, just as it demanded Florian pat each pillow exactly 3 times during inspection. The consequences for miscounting were similarly dire in both cases, though Florian's mistakes tended to result in bodily harm rather than social ostracization. In this world of manufactured importance, the tester's job became a kind of funhouse mirror, reflecting the whole absurd enterprise. When the Duke of Orleans threw a tantrum because his napkin was folded into a swan rather than a lily, Florian was across the palace dealing with a nearly identical crisis involving the arrangement of bolster pillows. When the royal treasurer agonized over accounting for missing coins that had likely never existed, Florian sweated over his logbook's meticulous documentation of mattress lumps that were probably just the king's imagination. The same pointless precision, the same fear of capricious punishment, the same desperate pretense that it all mattered tremendously. The servants understood this truth instinctively. They passed stories about the court's excesses, like bedtime tales to soothe their weary minds. The baron who kept a staff of 5 just to care for his wig collection. The countess who demanded her strawberries be arranged by size and hue but never eaten. The royal pastry chef who once fainted from stress when a single eclair collapsed. These stories always ended with the same unspoken moral. Better to be poor and sane than rich and ridiculous. Florian's trials became part of this oral tradition, his suffering transformed into dark comedy that helped the powerless endure. There was the time he spent 3 hours searching for an offensive lump that turned out to be the king's own signet ring left in the bed. The night he was ordered to test 12 identical mattresses in succession because the queen couldn't decide which suited her mood. The infamous week of the itch, when half the court became convinced their bedding was infested with invisible bugs, resulting in 17 mattress burnings and one very confused laundress being temporarily imprisoned. These stories spread through the servant quarters like wine, growing more elaborate with each telling, until even Florian barely recognized his own life in them. What no one spoke aloud, but everyone understood, was that these rituals existed precisely because they were pointless. The more meaningless the task, the more fervently it had to be performed. This was the first rule of court survival. A nobleman who questioned why he had to wear silver-buckled shoes to breakfast would soon find himself questioning other conventions, like the divine right of kings, or whether taxes should really be so high. Better to spend one's energy debating pillow stuffing than entertain more dangerous thoughts. Florian played his part like all the rest. He approached each mattress inspection with solemn gravity, even when he knew the king wouldn't sleep in it, even when he knew the complaints would come regardless of his findings. He maintained straight-faced sincerity when declaring that yes, this new arrangement of feathers did indeed promote humoral balance, just as the physicians claimed. He pretended not to hear the snickers when walking through the halls with his ceremonial pillow tucked under arm, just as the royal falconer pretended not to notice when his birds defecated on noble shoulders. In quieter moments, usually while lying awake on some miserable cot in the servants' quarters, Florian allowed himself to imagine a different life. One where a bed was just a bed, where sleep came unbidden rather than being coaxed like a shy animal, where no one's livelihood depended on the whims of another's restless night. But dawn always came, and with it the return to the grand charade. The bowing, the scraping, the careful pressing of hands into expensive fabrics while pretending it meant something. The true bedtime story whispered among servants wasn't about Florian or any individual tester. It was about all of them, the endless parade of humans through history who had bent their backs and stifled their laughter while the powerful convinced themselves their delusions were reality. The story always ended the same way too, with the quiet understanding that while kings and courts might rise and fall, the absurdity would continue long after. There would always be another mattress to test, another meaningless ritual to perform, another powerless person going through the motions while pretending not to know the joke was on them. Florian's only consolation was that, unlike the nobles, at least he never forgot it was all a game. And if his participation in the farce helped some scullery maid smile through her blisters, or gave a stable boy a story to distract from his hunger, then perhaps his ridiculous profession served some purpose after all. Not that he'd ever say so out loud. Some truths were better left between the lines, like the lump you pretend not to feel in a royal mattress, or the emptiness behind a courtier's practiced smile. Chapter 17. The Mattress Tester's Secret Diary. Excerpts from the personal journals of Jean-Baptiste Lefebvre, Royal Mattress Tester to Louis XVI, as preserved in the Archives Nationales, and heavily annotated by later historians. March 3rd, 1782. Tested new Hungarian goose down mattress for Her Majesty's private chambers. Down is suspiciously soft, likely adulterated with common duck feathers. reported it as unusually resilient to avoid offending Countess de Polignac, who supplied the bedding. Her Majesty will complain of backaches within the week. The Countess will be mortified, and I will be blamed for not speaking plainly. Such is the nature of our service. April 14th, 1782. The King's new mattress arrived from Lyon today, stuffed with medicinal herbs to promote humoral balance. Spent 2 hours picking rosemary sprigs from my undergarments after the inspection. The royal physician insists the scent will calm His Majesty's nerves, but all it does is make the bedchamber smell like a roasted chicken. The King will doubtless demand its removal by week's end, at which point the physician will blame the failure on improper testing. I've hidden 3 sprigs in my pillowcase. Perhaps they'll help me sleep through the coming storm. June 22nd, 1782. Disaster. The Swedish ambassador presented their Majesties with matching elk hair mattresses, touted as the height of Scandinavian luxury. What the Swedes consider luxury, civilized people would call torture. The hairs pierced the fabric like miniature spears. Spent the inspection fighting the urge to scream. Reported them as delightfully invigorating per Minister Vergennes' instructions. Diplomacy over comfort, as always. The Queen lasted 7 minutes before calling for her old bed. The ambassador looked ready to challenge someone to a duel. I may need to sleep standing up tonight. September 8, 1782. The infamous Dormeuse maudite has resurfaced. Found it in the West Wing storage while searching for a replacement bolster. The indentation in the center now looks disturbingly like a human silhouette. Told the chambermaids it was being removed for cleaning, then promptly had it locked in the old icehouse. If anyone asks, we never had this conversation. December 24th, 1782. Christmas Eve, and what gift does fate bring me? A crisis involving the royal children's mattresses. The Dauphin claims his bed is too happy, and prevents solemn reflection. The governess insists this is my fault for approving overly cheerful stuffing. Spent the afternoon removing every 3rd handful of feathers to create appropriate melancholy. The things we do for royalty. February 19, 1783. The Duke of Orleans has developed a theory that sleeping at a 17-degree angle promotes longevity. Now all his mattresses must be wedged accordingly. Tested the first one today. Slid off 6 times before managing to stay put long enough to assess support. My report carefully omitted the bruises. The Duke declared it a triumph of modern science. The servants are taking bets on how long until he breaks something. May 5th, 1783. The Queen has taken to having her mattresses sprinkled with rosewater before testing. Pleasant enough, until one realizes the sugar in the mixture attracts ants. Spent this evening's inspection brushing tiny trespassers from the sheets while maintaining perfect professional composure. Her Majesty must never know why I suddenly developed a twitch. July 14, 1783. Bastille Day. The streets roar with celebration while I lie atop the King's new state bed, counting the threads in the canopy to stay awake. They say a ruler's worth is measured by how well he sleeps. If so, France is doomed. This mattress could give a stone bruises. But who am I to judge? My official report will declare it firm yet yielding, just like last time and the time before that. Some truths are not meant for daylight. October 31st, 1783. All Hallows Eve, and the palace is abuzz with talk of ghosts. Little do they know the true horror lies in the betting accounts. The latest invoice from the Lyon feather merchants includes charges for extra fluffy winter down at triple the usual price. A transparent scam, given that geese don't grow seasonally fluffier. Pointed this out to the steward, who sighed and said, "The Queen likes the way it sounds." So begins another winter of being slowly crushed to death by overpriced plumage. January 16, 1784. The cold has seeped into everything, including royal tempers. Tested 12 mattresses today before finding one the King deemed tolerable. His exact words upon lying down: "It will do." High praise indeed. Meanwhile, my own pallet in the servants' quarters has developed a lump roughly the size and shape of my growing resentment. But no matter. Tomorrow brings another bed, another inspection, another opportunity to pretend that any of this matters. March 9, 1784. Dreamt last night that I was trapped inside a giant mattress surrounded by feathers that whispered court secrets in languages I couldn't understand. Woke in a panic to find I'd actually burrowed into my own straw pallet in my sleep. The maid who found me hasn't stopped giggling. Perhaps it's time to request a transfer to the curtain testing division. At least draperies don't talk back. April 1st, 1784. April Fool's Day, and the universe played the cruelest joke of all. A perfectly decent mattress. No lumps, no odors, no hidden surprises. Tested it 3 times in disbelief before declaring it fit for royal use. The king slept through the night for once and is convinced I've performed some sort of miracle. Now the entire court wants their beds blessed by the famous mattress tester. If I had any sense, I'd start charging. September 2nd, 1784. The leaves begin to turn, and with them royal patience. The Queen has decided her pillows are conspiring against her, whatever that means. Spent the afternoon testing each one while she watched like a hawk, searching for signs of treason in the stitching patterns. Found nothing, of course, but had to recommend replacing them all to calm her nerves. The old ones will go to the servants, a rare bit of luck for them, assuming they don't mind sleeping on possibly seditious bedding. December 31st, 1784. Another year gone, marked only by the increasing absurdity of my duties. Tonight I test the king's special New Year's mattress, stuffed with auspicious herbs and blessed by 3 bishops. It smells like a church exploded in a garden, and the embroidery is so thick it feels like lying on braille. His Majesty will use it exactly once, before declaring it too stimulating and demanding his old bed back. But tradition must be observed, just as I must pretend this is a noble calling rather than a glorified game of make-believe. Happy New Year indeed. Great diary, ends abruptly here. Historical records indicate Lefebvre retired unexpectedly in early 1785, citing chronic feather inhalation. He reportedly spent his remaining years running a small inn where, according to travelers' accounts, the beds were remarkably comfortable. Chapter 18. Why we still fascinate over forgotten jobs. There is something profoundly human about our obsession with obsolete professions. The royal mattress tester joins a peculiar pantheon of historical curiosities. The court whisperer who ensured noble ears heard only flattery, the imperial fan-bearer who calculated precise breezes for temperamental emperors, the medieval conner who tested beer quality by sitting in puddles of it in leather trousers. These roles speak to us not because we long for their return, but because they hold up a funhouse mirror to our own working lives, reflecting back the absurdities we politely ignore in our modern vocations. Consider the tester's essential paradox. He spent his career ensuring perfect rest for others while getting none himself. How many today check emails at midnight to facilitate someone else's productivity? The royal bed may have been replaced by the corner office, but the dynamic remains eerily familiar. We laugh at the tester sniffing pillows for poison because we recognize our own performative busywork, the endless meetings about meetings, the compliance forms no one reads, the elaborate rituals of corporate culture that serve no purpose beyond their own continuation. There is comfort, too, in the tangible nature of these forgotten jobs. The tester's world was physical in ways ours rarely are. Feathers could be counted, lumps palpated, fabric tested between thumb and forefinger. In an age where most work happens through glass screens and leaves no physical trace, there's nostalgia for labor that resulted in something you could point to, even if it was merely a well-fluffed pillow. The tester might have been absurd, but he was absurd in 3 dimensions, with calluses to prove it. More deeply, these obsolete roles remind us how thoroughly culture shapes what we consider valuable labor. The tester's position made perfect sense in a world that believed monarchs ruled by divine right. Of course, God's chosen needed someone to test their bedding. That the job seems ludicrous now says less about the tester himself than about how completely our world view has shifted. One wonders which of today's essential positions will provoke equal bafflement in centuries to come. The algorithm whisperers, the branding consultants, the professional conference attendees, all may someday seem as peculiar as a man paid to lie on beds. Perhaps we cling to these stories because they validate a quiet suspicion that haunts all working people, that much of what we do is theater, that the emperor's mattress had lumps no matter how thoroughly it was tested. The tester knew this truth better than anyone, yet showed up each night to perform his rituals anyway. There is nobility in that persistence, even when the task is foolish. Maybe especially then. The royal mattress tester survives in our imagination precisely because he embodies this universal tension between the work we must do and the work we pretend matters, between the lives we live and the stories we tell about. His ghost lingers not just in museums and history books, but in every office worker who has ever reframed pointless tasks as vital missions, every employee who has nodded gravely during discussions of inconsequential matters, every one of us who has at some point lied awake wondering if our labors will outlast us or fade into obscurity like so much scattered down. We remember the tester because in the end, he was one of us, caught between dignity and absurdity, between taking his work seriously and knowing better. That he did so while literally lying down makes him not less, but more relatable. His story endures because it is, in its way, everyone's story. Just as the royal bed was never really about sleep, the tester was never really about mattresses. He was always about us. And so the last lesson of the royal mattress tester may be this. All jobs are temporary, some just more visibly so. The feathers scatter. The fabric wears thin. The bodies that once pressed their shapes into expensive bedding turn to dust. But the human need to find meaning in our labor. That remains. We'll keep telling the tester's story as long as we continue our own daily performances, as long as we still need reassurance that even the most ridiculous work can, in its way, matter. The beds are empty now, the tester's long gone. But somewhere between history and humor, between fact and folklore, their legacy lingers like the faint impression of a body on an unmade bed, visible just long enough to remind us we were here.